My father-in-law, the CEO, called me a lazy pig and fired me while I was on my first approved vacation in 6 years. I was sitting at a cafe in Paris, a perfect little place on the left bank with wrought iron tables and a view of Notre Dame in the distance, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison Industries. I almost didn't answer. This was my vacation, my first real break in 6 years. The first time I had taken more than a single day off since I joined the family company as a 24-year-old newlywed, eager to prove myself worthy of the Morrison name. But old habits die hard. I answered, Vivienne. The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, unmistakably belonging to Harold Morrison, my husband's father, the CEO of Morrison Industries, and the man who had made my professional life a living hell for the past decade. What do you think you're doing? I'm having coffee, Harold, in Paris on my approved vacation. Approved? I didn't approve anything. Marcus approved it. 3 months ago. It's in the system. Marcus doesn't have the authority to approve executive leave. I do, and I certainly didn't approve you abandoning your responsibilities to gallivant around Europe like some kind of what, Harold? Like some kind of lazy pig. I set down my espresso. Around me, Paris continued its eternal dance. Lovers walking hand in hand, artists setting up their easels, the Seine glittering in the afternoon sun. The most beautiful city in the world, and I was being called a pig by a man who hadn't taken a vacation in 30 years because no one could stand to be around him long enough to cover his duties. A lazy pig, I repeated. That's what you think I am. That's what you've proven yourself to be. 6 years, and the moment you get a chance, you run off to Paris while the company falls apart. The company isn't falling apart, Harold. I prepared 3 months of contingency plans before I left. Every project is on track. Every deadline will be met. I trained my team specifically. Your team is incompetent without you, which proves you've failed as a leader. A real executive builds systems that don't require their presence. I did build those systems. They're working perfectly. Then why did the Hartwell account call this morning asking where you were? Because Richard Hartwell is a micromanager who likes to speak directly to me about things my team is perfectly capable of handling. Did he have an actual problem? Silence. That's not the point. Did he have an actual problem, Harold? More silence. The point is that you should be here. Not in Paris, not on vacation. Here, doing your job. I am doing my job. Part of doing my job well is taking care of myself so I can continue to perform at a high level. That's why I requested this vacation. That's why Marcus approved it. That's why I'm here. Well, I'm unapproving it. Get on a plane tonight. Be in the office tomorrow morning. No. The word hung in the air between us, across an ocean, across a lifetime of me saying yes to every unreasonable demand this man had ever made. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not cutting my vacation short. I'm not getting on a plane tonight, and I'm not going to be bullied by you anymore. You're not going to be, Harold sputtered. Do you know who you're talking to? I know exactly who I'm talking to. I'm talking to a man who has taken credit for my work for 10 years, a man who promoted his incompetent sons over me despite my superior performance, a man who has called me every degrading name in the book because he can't stand that his son married someone smarter than the entire Morrison bloodline combined. How dare you? I'm not finished. I'm talking to a man who hasn't had an original idea since 1987, a man whose company would have collapsed years ago if I hadn't quietly fixed every disaster his leadership created, a man who is so terrified of being exposed as a fraud that he tears down anyone who threatens to outshine him. You're fired. I'm sorry? You heard me. You're fired. Pack your desk when you get back, if you even bother to come back. We don't need you. We never needed you. You were a charity case, a favor to my son, and now you're nothing. We don't need a lazy pig. I repeated his words back to him. Is that your official position? That's exactly my position. I laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh. A real laugh. The kind that comes from deep in your belly when something is so absurd, so perfectly ridiculous, that your body can't contain the humor. What's so funny? You are, Harold. You're hilarious. You just fired your company's chief operating officer, the person who runs every aspect of your business while you play golf and take 3-hour lunches because she had the audacity to take an approved vacation. You're not irreplaceable. No, I'm not, but what I know is. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should enjoy the rest of your day, Harold, because things are about to get very interesting. I hung up before he could respond. Then I finished my espresso, paid my bill, and walked along the Seine with a smile on my face. I wasn't worried. I wasn't scared. I was free. And Harold Morrison had no idea what he had just done. My name is Vivienne Okafor Morrison. I am 34 years old. I was born in Abuja, Nigeria, the daughter of a diplomat who taught me that power isn't about titles. It's about information. The person who controls the information, my father used to say, controls everything. Titles can be taken away, positions can be eliminated, but knowledge, once acquired, belongs to you forever. I had spent 10 years at Morrison Industries acquiring knowledge, not just knowledge about how to do my job, although I had plenty of that. I'm talking about knowledge of where the bodies were buried, knowledge of every questionable decision, every ethical shortcut, every moment when the Morrison family had chosen profit over principle. I had documentation of Harold Morrison backdating contracts to avoid tax obligations. I had emails showing Marcus's brothers, Derek and Jonathan, approving products they knew were defective. I had records of safety violations that had been covered up, environmental regulations that had been ignored, employees who had been silenced with settlements and NDAs. I had 10 years of evidence that Morrison Industries was built on a foundation of fraud, negligence, and corruption, and I had copies of everything. Because I wasn't just the chief operating officer, I was the person who had been quietly building an insurance policy since the day I realized this family would never respect me, no matter how hard I worked or how much value I created. Harold Morrison thought he had fired a lazy pig. He had actually fired the only person who knew where all the evidence was hidden, and now I had nothing left to lose. Let me tell you about those 6 years without a vacation. When I joined Morrison Industries, I was young, ambitious, and naively optimistic. I had just married Marcus, the eldest son, and I believed that hard work and talent would be enough to earn my place in the family business. I was wrong. From the first day, Harold made it clear that I was tolerated, not welcomed. I was given the worst assignments, the failing projects, the impossible clients, the situations that no one else wanted to touch. The expectation was that I would fail, and my failure would prove that Marcus had made a mistake by marrying outside the Morrison social circle. Instead, I succeeded. Every failing project I touched turned around. Every impossible client became a loyal partner. Every situation that was supposed to break me became another line on my resume of accomplishments. But success didn't earn me respect. It earned me more impossible assignments, more impossible expectations, more reasons for Harold to resent me. "You think you're so smart," he said to me once, after I had saved a $50 million contract that his son Derek had nearly destroyed. "But you'll never be one of us. You'll never be a real Morrison." I'm not trying to be a Morrison. I'm trying to do my job. Your job is whatever I say it is, and right now, your job is to fix the mess in the Shanghai office. You leave tomorrow. Tomorrow is my anniversary. Then I guess you'll celebrate in Shanghai. I went to Shanghai. I missed my anniversary. I fixed the mess. And I came back to find that Derek had been promoted to executive vice president while I remained a senior director. That was the moment I started keeping records. The vacation request had been submitted 3 months in advance. I had followed every protocol, filed every form, obtained every approval. Marcus had signed off. The HR department had confirmed. My team was prepared. Everything was in order. But Harold Morrison didn't care about protocols. Harold Morrison cared about control and the idea that I might enjoy something, might experience joy outside of serving his company, was intolerable to him. So he waited until I was in Paris, until I was finally relaxing for the first time in 6 years, and he called to remind me of my place. "We don't need a lazy pig." Those words would haunt him for the rest of his life. I stayed in Paris for the full 2 weeks. I visited the Louvre, I walked through Montmartre, I ate croissants and drank wine and read books in the Luxembourg Gardens. I didn't check my email. I didn't respond to the increasingly frantic calls from the office. I didn't engage with the family group chat, which went from angry to confused to panicked as the days passed. I simply lived. And while I was living, things at Morrison Industries began to fall apart. The Hartwell account, the one Harold had been so concerned about, fell through completely. Without me, there to manage Richard Hartwell's neurotic demands, Derek tried to step in. Derek, who had the interpersonal skills of a brick wall and the strategic vision of a goldfish. Richard Hartwell pulled his business within a week. $30 million in annual revenue? Gone. The Shanghai office, the one I had stabilized years ago, started having problems again. Apparently, the systems I had built required someone who actually understood them. Harold had assigned Jonathan to oversee operations, and Jonathan had immediately begun dismantling everything I had created. Production delays, quality issues, client complaints, $15 million at risk. And then there was the audit, the quarterly compliance audit that I had been preparing for since January, the one that required extensive documentation, careful coordination, and intimate knowledge of every contract, every vendor, every financial arrangement the company had made, the one that Harold had apparently forgotten about entirely. Without me there to guide them, the compliance team didn't know where to find half the documents. The auditors started asking questions that no one could answer. The situation escalated from routine to concerning to critical. By the time I landed back in the United States 2 weeks later, Morrison Industries was in chaos, and I was officially unemployed. I walked into the Morrison Industries building on a Monday morning. Not to work. I had been fired. But to collect my things, and more importantly, to witness the aftermath. The lobby was the same as always. Marble floors, modern art on the walls, the Morrison family crest displayed prominently behind the reception desk. But the energy was different. Employees who usually walked with purpose now scurried with anxiety. Phones rang constantly. The air itself felt tense. Mrs. Morrison. The security guard at the front desk looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but I've been told you're not allowed past the lobby." "I understand, James. I'm just here to collect my personal belongings from my office." "I have to call upstairs." "Of course. Take your time." I waited in the lobby, watching the chaos unfold through the glass walls of the conference rooms. I could see Derek and Jonathan in one room, arguing with a group of people I recognized as auditors. In another room, Marcus was on the phone, his face red, his gestures frantic. My husband. We hadn't spoken since Paris. He had texted, called, left voicemails, but I hadn't responded. I wasn't ready to deal with him yet. I wasn't sure I ever would be. After 10 minutes, James returned with an escort, 2 security guards who were clearly uncomfortable with their assignment. "Mrs. Morrison will take you to your office. You have 15 minutes to collect your belongings." "That's very generous. Thank you." We took the elevator to the executive floor. As the doors opened, I could hear Harold's voice echoing down the hallway. "I don't care what the auditors want. Tell them to come back next month when we've had time to—" He stopped mid-sentence as he saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The CEO who had fired me and the employee who had refused to beg for her job back. "What is she doing here?" Harold demanded. "Collecting my belongings," I said calmly, "as is my right under company policy." "You have no rights here. You're fired." "Yes, you mentioned that. Lazy pig, I believe was the term. Very professional." Harold's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Get her out of here." "Actually," a new voice interrupted, "I'd like her to stay." We all turned. Standing at the end of the hallway was a woman I recognized, Margaret Chen, the lead auditor from Whitmore and Associates. She was holding a folder that looked very thick and very concerning. "Mrs. Morrison," Margaret said, "I was hoping to speak with you. We've been having some difficulties with the documentation for this audit." "I'm no longer an employee," I said. "I'm afraid I can't help you." "That's a shame, because the documents we do have raise some very serious questions, questions that only someone with your level of access could answer." "What kind of questions?" "Questions about backdated contracts, falsified safety reports, environmental violations that were never reported to regulatory agencies." Margaret opened her folder. "Questions that could result in federal charges if the answers aren't satisfactory." Harold went from purple to white. Those allegations are completely unfounded. They're not allegations, Mr. Morrison. They're preliminary findings based on documents we've already obtained. Margaret looked at me. Documents that appear to have been organized by someone who knew exactly where to look. I smiled. I'm a very organized person. So it seems. Margaret closed her folder. Mrs. Morrison, would you be willing to meet with us? Privately? We have questions that I suspect you have answers to. I would be happy to help, but I think it's only fair to warn you, I have quite a lot to say. I'm counting on it. Harold finally found his voice. If you speak to them, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work again. You'll what, Harold? Fire me again? I laughed. You already called me a lazy pig and threw me out of the company. You have nothing left to threaten me with. But I have 10 years of documentation about everything you've done. Every shortcut, every cover-up, every time you chose profit over people's lives. You don't have anything. I have everything. Copies of contracts you backdated to avoid taxes, emails approving defective products, settlement agreements with employees you silenced, photographs of environmental violations you buried. I have a file on every member of this family, Harold, and I've been building it since the day you told me I'd never be a real Morrison. The hallway was silent. Everyone, the security guards, the executives who had gathered to watch, even Margaret Chen, stared at me with varying degrees of shock, admiration, or terror. You wouldn't dare, Harold whispered. You fired me for taking a vacation. You called me a lazy pig. You told me I was nothing. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. So tell me, Harold, what exactly do I have to lose? He had no answer. Because he knew, they all knew, that I had nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people in the world. The investigation took 3 months. I cooperated fully with the auditors, providing them with everything I had. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence I had collected over 10 years of being underestimated and overlooked. The findings were devastating. Harold Morrison had been backdating contracts for 15 years, avoiding an estimated $47 million in tax obligations. Derek and Jonathan had approved products they knew were defective, resulting in injuries to customers that had been settled quietly and hidden from regulators. The company had violated environmental regulations at 7 different facilities, contaminating groundwater and exposing workers to hazardous materials. The Morrison family had built their empire on fraud, and I had the receipts. Federal charges were filed in November. Harold Morrison was charged with tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy. He faced up to 20 years in federal prison. Derek and Jonathan were charged with product liability fraud and obstruction of justice. They faced 10 to 15 years each. The company's stock plummeted. Clients fled. Partners distanced themselves. The Morrison Industries that had once been valued at $800 million was now worth less than $100 million and falling. And Marcus, my husband, the man I had married, believing we would build a life together, was left to pick up the pieces. He came to see me 2 weeks after the charges were announced. I was living in a rented apartment on the other side of the city, building a new life separate from everything I had known. When I opened the door and saw him standing, there I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, just emptiness. Vivian. His voice was broken. Can we talk? Come in. He sat on my couch, a modest piece of furniture, nothing like the leather sectional we had shared in our mansion, and he looked at me with eyes that had aged 10 years in 3 months. Why? He asked. Why did you do this? Your father fired me and called me a lazy pig. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to come to me, to let me handle it, to give us a chance to make it right. You had 10 years to make it right, Marcus. 10 years of watching your father belittle me, overlook me, take credit for my work. And what did you do? Nothing. You let it happen because it was easier than standing up to him. I was trying to keep the peace. You were trying to protect your inheritance. Let's be honest with each other, Marcus. You never chose me over your family, not once. Every time I was passed over for promotion, every time your father humiliated me, every time I sacrificed my life for a company that treated me like garbage, you were silent. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed. You want to talk about fair? I worked 80-hour weeks for 6 years straight. I saved this company from collapse multiple times. I built systems that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. And when I finally took a vacation, my first vacation in 6 years, your father fired me for it. He was wrong to do that. He was wrong about a lot of things, but you never said so. You never defended me. You never stood up for the woman you supposedly loved. Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I love you, Vivian. I've always loved you. You loved what I did for you. You loved having a wife who made you look good, who handled everything so you didn't have to. But you never loved me enough to protect me. And now it's too late. What do you mean? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer has already drawn up the papers. Please, Vivian. There's nothing left to discuss, Marcus. Your family is facing federal charges. Your company is collapsing. And I refuse to go down with a ship I spent 10 years trying to save while everyone on board treated me like ballast. But I need you. You needed me for 10 years and you never once showed it. Now you can figure things out on your own. I turned to face him. I think you should go. He left, and I finally felt what I had been waiting to feel since that phone call in Paris. Peace. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I didn't ask for much, just what I had earned, what I had contributed. The prenuptial agreement that Harold had insisted on actually worked in my favor. It clearly documented my contributions to the company and entitled me to a percentage of its value. Of course, the company wasn't worth what it had been, but $30 million was more than enough to start over. Harold Morrison pleaded guilty to tax evasion to avoid a trial on the more serious charges. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. At 72 years old, there was a real possibility he would never come home. Derek and Jonathan took plea deals as well. Derek got 5 years. Jonathan got 3. The Morrison empire crumbled, and I built something new. I started my own consulting firm, specializing in helping companies avoid the kind of ethical disasters that had destroyed Morrison Industries. My first clients were former Morrison partners who had seen what I could do and wanted me on their side. Within 2 years, my firm was generating $15 million annually. Within 5 years, I had 100 employees and a reputation as the person you called when you wanted to do business the right way. I was featured in Forbes, in Bloomberg, in every publication that mattered. The woman who took down Morrison Industries, they called me. The whistleblower who couldn't be silenced. But my favorite headline came from a small business magazine that had interviewed me about my journey. The lazy pig who built an empire. I framed that article. I hung it in my office. And every time I looked at it, I smiled. 3 years ago, I received a letter from Harold Morrison. He was in prison, serving out his sentence, and apparently he had developed a fondness for writing to the people he had wronged. The letter was 3 pages long. In it, he apologized, not for calling me a lazy pig, not for firing me, but for failing to recognize my potential. He talked about how prison had given him time to reflect, how he had come to understand that his treatment of me was perhaps excessive, how he hoped we could move past our differences and find some form of reconciliation. He didn't apologize for the fraud. He didn't apologize for the safety violations that had hurt people. He didn't apologize for the environmental destruction that had poisoned communities. He apologized for not recognizing my potential, as if that was the only thing he had done wrong. I threw the letter away. Some apologies aren't worth accepting. Some bridges are better burned, and some people don't deserve the peace that forgiveness would bring them. Last month, I was in Paris again. Same cafe, same table, same view of Notre Dame in the distance. But everything else was different. I was different. I wasn't a stressed-out executive desperate for a moment of peace. I wasn't a woman waiting for a phone call that would ruin everything. I wasn't the Vivian who had answered Harold Morrison's call all those years ago. I was free of the Morrison family, free of a marriage that had never truly supported me, free of a company that had taken everything I had and given nothing in return. I ordered an espresso and watched the Seine glitter in the afternoon sun. My phone buzzed, a text from my assistant. Forbes interview confirmed for next Tuesday. They want to talk about your new book. The book. The Lazy Pig's Guide to Ethical Business, a combination memoir and manifesto about my experiences at Morrison Industries and the lessons I had learned about doing business the right way. It was already a bestseller. I smiled and typed back, "Perfect. And after that, clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I'm taking a vacation." Another one? As many as I want. That's the benefit of being the boss. I set down my phone and raised my espresso to the Paris sky. To lazy pigs everywhere, I said quietly, may we all find our freedom. If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to burn it all down to build something better. Like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself, refusing to be diminished, and the sweet satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. We don't need a lazy pig. That's what my father-in-law, the CEO, called me when he fired me for taking my first vacation in 6 years. I was in Paris. I was finally living, and he couldn't stand it. So he called me a lazy pig and threw me out. I laughed and hung up on him. And then I did something he never expected. I cooperated with the federal auditors. I gave them everything, 10 years of evidence about the fraud, the cover-ups, the violations. Harold Morrison got 8 years in prison. His sons got 5 and 3. The company collapsed. And I started my own firm, $15 million a year, Forbes profiles, best-selling book, The Lazy Pig's Guide to Ethical Business. We don't need a lazy pig. You were right, Harold. You didn't need me, but you should have wanted to keep me. Because the lazy pig was the only one holding your empire together. And now it's gone, and I'm still here, building something better, something mine.